Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling, myth busting. And on this special edition of One Plus One, it's our All Things Jamaica, All Things Caribbean episode, and our All Things Americas episodes with Renee Johnston, a proud Jamaican America, coming to us from the Garden State known as New Jersey. Check out the brilliant, check out this brilliant black leftist of ours every Saturday nearly at Black Liberation Media, the host of Saturdays with Renee, with her co-host, One Plus One fan favorite and great friend of the show, Dr. Jared Ball of I Mix What I Like. Renee, always an honor to speak to you, and thanks so much for this episode. And yeah, yeah, thanks for coming on the program.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me back. Just so you all, who are watching know, like Youri has been really great with rescheduling this. We've been trying to schedule this Zoom, I think, for like 2 months. And it's been the never-ending saga of like, I can't do it again. I'm really sorry. There's just, lifes. And but when it came down to it and you were like, we should do it on Jamaican Independence Day. And I was like, that's a really good
Exactly.
idea. Yeah,
All right. Oh,
actually.
yeah.
And I will admit to this. Yeah, you good? Okay. I thought today was the 5th and Friday was the 6th. I just had it wrong. So up until this morning, I thought we were recording tomorrow. And so fortunately, I had done the research already. And so it's just a matter of navigating. I'd been invited by Jay from Millennials Are Killing Capitalism to sit and re-listen to one of his interviews with Johanna Fernandez, who we just sent to the ancestors a week and change ago. Presente, as I just learned from Hiram, whenever we lose people, you say presente. So Dr.
Exactly.
Johanna Fernandez Presente is a reminder that they actually never leave us. And so I raced off from there to join you, Youri, and I'm really happy to be here and excited as always to talk about Jamaica because as my mother teases me and says all the time, you're Yankee. And I'm like, no, I'm not.
Wow.
But
Mom's
it
gonna
is
be
it is the
but
on it is the ongoing fight within every family where the parents were, came here from Jamaica for whatever time frame and things, and they had children here. And but I was brought up in part on the island. So school ended, and the minute school ended, a week later, we were on a plane and we were in Jamaica for the entirety of the summer. And I came back Labor Day weekend, and that was my childhood for 10 years. I
wow.
spent every summer in Jamaica. And so, when I talk to people about my pride in being a Jamaican, it's not because, there's these far off, like I literally remember climbing the mango tree and running up the hill and like
Wow.
all those things. Like this was part of my childhood. So
Well, that's
it's a
well.
different, it's a different world when you actually spend time in a place. It's a whole different experience. So
Well, and that's why you are and that's why I think you are. That's why we are so lucky that that you are going to be our history teacher, our tour guide, our historical guide on all things Jamaica. And actually, just before I ask my first question, uh, a quick pitch. Remember, folks, to remember, folks, to share One Plus One widely because sometimes Facebook blocks me from sharing widely. So again, share us widely, donate generously, and Renee recently was on our good friend Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical show. Please, folks, become a patron to his show. He's facing unemployment. If you help him out, you're actually helping me out. And you can get rid of Spotify. YouTube has all the free music, and you can drop Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, and especially drop HBO Max. Uh, I mean, do you really want your money to go to that douchebag Bill Maher? So become a Patreon to Chris, become a monthly sustainer to Capitalism Can Be Fixed to help out the wonderful, stupendous Canadian leftist Jasmine Pirodun be paid 1,000 a month. In the end, it's indie media and left-wing advocacy work, and it's money better well spent. And now, on to the topic at hand. So first off, Renee, again, thanks so much for coming on the program and coming back on the show. My first question is the following. Uh, what was Jamaica like before British colonialism? How did it forcibly become part of the evil British Empire? And then talk to us, what were the conditions like for the vast majority of Jamaicans when it was under the rule of the British?
So, and just so your audience, I ended up doing a lot of research. This was really great for me, to be honest, Yuri, because you know what you know, right? And so me and my family history, my mother and I have actually been for the past couple of years trying to trace our family background and trying to figure out where where we're all from. My maiden name is Service, which is you would think like a unique last name,
Yeah,
but I think it's like my third great grandfather or something like that was like one of three brothers and they had like 40 kids between them. So there's actually a lot of services from Jamaica.
yeah,
And both of my mother's parents were Jamaican. So, like this is when I say I'm first generation American, I mean like first generation in this colony, everybody in my family is Jamaican, right?
wow.
So,
Proper Jamaican
but
Americans, yeah.
the actual like history, like going back prior to before colonization, I'd never researched any of that before. So you gave me an excuse to do some research that I hadn't ever done, and it was really helpful. So what I learned and that I will share with you all is Jamaica was actually home to the Taino people, and they were fishermen. They discovered this because of the red clay pots. Red clay continues to play a large role in Jamaica
Yeah,
now. It's something that it naturally occurs, red clay in some parts of the island. It's how they knew that bauxite is part of the natural resources of the island, which has continued to be an issue for those that live there. But Jamaica was actually initially colonized because Columbus got lost. He
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
he
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
he
Yeah,
landed on the island in 1494, thought he was in India, this thing. And then there was a fight between England and Spain in 1655. And so that's actually when England colonized Jamaica. At that point, there had already been, slave trade involved. Um, there was a great deal of battles because, Britain wanted to take over the island for itself, to colonize and to steal the resources and to continue the enslavement. Um, so there's a huge storyline about what happened between Spain and England on this island, right in the 15 and 1600s.
yeah.
Um,
What we call now that is a proper inter-imperial war, as our
yes,
Marxist-Leninist friends would say, correct?
yes. And so this was interesting for me to learn because I didn't realize that Spain had rule in Jamaica for as long as it did until it lost to England. Um, the
And
battle it's
then
go ahead.
then that's interesting. So were so Spain colonized Jamaica first.
Yes.
And we all know that Columbus was a mass murderer. We're talking
Yes.
genocidal mass murderer. So by the and so when that happened, was there settler colonialism of people of people from
Yes.
Spain in Jamaica, and then when Britain stole Jamaica from Spain, is that where we get the Atlantic slave trade and the kidnapping of Black
No,
Africans?
it started with Spain. It
Okay,
started
so
with Spain.
okay, all right,
It started
interesting.
with Spain. So there had already been slaves that were being traded on the island. It ended up being a port for trade. Um, so there was a great deal of movement within the Atlantic slave trade, using Jamaica as a port and as a point of connection during that route, which I think is why there were so many Africans on the island as time went by, because it was a port for the slave trade.
So then briefly, so that being said, briefly then explain what were the conditions like for Jamaicans, Taino, and later the enslaved Black people under Spain, and then what were the conditions like under the British Empire, the evil British Empire? Well, both evils.
Right, right. I mean, I don't, from what I've learned, I don't know that it was, and I don't think this will surprise anybody. I don't think it was very much different between Spain and England, right? For those who were being traded and enslaved. I will say that the Maroons came to be while Spain was still there. But the Maroon Wars, which happened in the late 1600s, early 1700s, that they ended up signing their treaties with Britain. So as slaves were escaping and run into the highlands, as the slave revolts were happening on the island, um, that Maroon land came to be under, while Jamaica was under British rule, and that's why the treaty was actually with Britain and not with Spain. But those revolts and those fights and people escaping into the highlands started while Spain was still in rule, and it was the Spanish slaves that started the Maroon population in Jamaica.
Interesting. And then when Jamaica was colonized by Britain, this was during the time of the Atlantic slave trade. At some
Hmm.
point, Britain did abolish slavery and slavery
Hmm.
on its colonies. Talk then about what were the conditions like of the people when they were formally colonized by Britain. And I think it's safe to say, as our good friend Abiyomi, we've been doing our Africa series. The conditions of the people never really changed. There was a lot of forced labor and so forth like that, but now
Hmm.
people get paid a pittance as opposed to not getting paid at all. Correct? Or
And there's still smuggling happening, right? Like, even though they quote unquote and right, there's still smuggling, there's still slave trade happening, there is still movement of African bodies across oceans to be enslaved in other places, right? So although there was this supposed decision that there wasn't going to be there wasn't going to be slavery anymore, we all know that that's not actually, like, that wasn't the end all, right? It didn't just stop that day and that was the end of it. um but I'll say that, that, and I think the Maroon country and the sovereignty of the Akampag nation on the island is a vastly understudied thing. I don't know how many people fully understand that the treaties, there was a lot of, what's the word for it? Uh
resistance, a lot of resistance to British rule.
no, well, no, like that resistance was, I mean, the Maroon Wars are a literal historical, like, there's stories about the Maroon Wars, which I had not read many of them. I knew that they happened. I knew that the Maroon Wars are why they had to sign the treaty, because they were like, we have to do something in order to try, and then what was also happening, you had slaves that were escaping and running to the Maroon lands. And that's how they were escaping slavery, was going to the Maroon lands on the island. And so they were trying to instill this treaty between the Maroons and the British government, because the fighting that was happening, they were not winning. The British were not winning, which often happens when you have indigenous people who are fighting for their sovereignty. And I think a lot of times people, when people look at the history of a place and they see, well, this, because yes, where Jamaica was they called themselves free, but they were still under British rule, right? So
Exactly.
even in the 60s, when they said, okay, we're going to be free now. We're going to separate ourselves. Part of the whole plan at that time in 1962 when they declared their independence, they still retained the British monarch as the head of
Exactly.
state. That was part of the Constitution when they declared independence. So even though technically they say they're independent, they were still under British rule and they're still fighting that battle, right? Like I didn't take the
Well, in
time to
fact,
look to see like where that fight is like right now today. But I know the last time I looked, they were still working on we're going to remove the British monarch as the head of state and da, da, da. But I mean, we started this process in 1962. It's 2026 and we're still trying to
okay.
get away from it.
You already okay. So you already sort of answered this question, but if you want to expand a bit more, feel free to go ahead. So when Jamaica became independent or semi-independent or independence only in name, however you want to frame it, was it one of violent struggle or a peaceful transition of power?
Well, this all started as a violent struggle, right? Like part of the reason that it even got to where Britain started to allow Jamaicans to have some say in what was happening on the island was because of the revolts, because of the uprisings. There was a whole labor movement that started in the early 1930s
Yeah.
after after the trade went from sugar to bananas and there were all these things that would you have Garvey with the UNIA, you have earthquakes sinking cities into the ocean. It's like there was a lot of stuff happening in the early 1900s in Jamaica that were all part of this transition to forcing Britain to understand that you had to allow Jamaicans to play a role in their own government. So the initial, I mean, I guess technically, if you look at it and you say, well, in 1962, what was happening? It was a quote unquote peaceful transition, right? They decided they were going to do the federation. They were going to allow Jamaicans to rule. They signed off, but I don't know. Would it have been peaceful if they said, "Nah, we want you out"? Right? Like, if if the decision in the 1960s was not, we're going to sign a constitution and we're going to hold on to the British monarch and we're going to allow you to still play a role in Jamaican government and affairs, if the decision was get off the island, right? I don't know if it would have been as quote unquote peaceful as them just signing some documentations and saying, okay, we're gonna sign off on this constitution, we're gonna declare ourselves independent, but we're gonna maintain the British monarch as head of state
And
because
even
that
and
there's a
even
very distinct thing in that, you know?
and even that, England was forced to, I guess you could say, make concessions because there was just endless revolts, endless slave
Yes.
revolts, endless sabotage, and yeah, uprisings,
Yeah.
some uprisings, armed uprisings. Other uprisings is just people rioting because the Brits, as we all know, shriek their colonies like shit. England's not even nice towards one
Right.
another, for God's sakes.
Right. Right.
So,
Right. But the labor movement in Jamaica is also, I knew a little of it because my father's grandparents were in Jamaica at this time. So this was, part of this family history conversation. And also it is the Jamaicans that were privy to this work, this labor work in the 1930s, who were setting sugar plantations on fire in Florida. Right? Because
wow.
in support of the black folks in Florida who were indentured servants and who were still living under slavery. They weren't technically slaves, but they were still living under this same oppressive situation. And so, when I try to explain to people that my grandfather was part of the groups that were setting sugar plantations on fire in Florida. Like people look at me like I have, but it's because this is the history of the island, right? What?
I'm even shocked. I'm even shocked because before we talk about all of the prime ministers and their social economic legacy, the reason why even somebody like me is even shocked, and I've seen documentaries about Jamaica, is because look, I've seen a documentary about Peter Tosh. I've seen multiple documentaries on Bob Marley, and even the best documentary I saw about Jamaica called Life and Debt, which I think which we might even bring up. They don't talk about any of this. They don't talk about all of these slave revolts or anything like that. And when they
No,
talk
and they don't
about
talk about,
and
and they don't talk
when they
about the
talk
labor. They don't
yeah,
talk
and when
about the
they
labor organizing. Mm-mm.
yeah, and when they talk about Britain giving independence, it's as if it was just a peaceful transition of power,
Mhm.
unlike, say, you know, what happened in what happened in Kenya, or how Algeria got their independence from settler colonial France and so forth. That's why I am
Mhm.
yeah, that's why I'm stunned, and why my eyes are as big as my glasses right now.
It's a fascinating history though, and it's also one of those things where I really appreciate that you invited me to do this and that you sent me the questions, because it really forced me to start looking at gathering some information. And I think I'm going to pursue some of this and really do some more research, because I would love to learn more about the labor organizing in Jamaica and how in the 1940s they were burning shit up. And you know what I
Believe
mean? Like it was no, they were no joke, because they would, you get sick of it. Like anybody, you get sick of these people. They come to your island, they bring nothing but chaos and disease. They nothing but so drama. And then they tell you have to work for you're not a slave anymore, but you have to work for slave labor. You're still laboring under the same oppressive groups that were in control when you were a slave. And and it's the same thing here, right?
yeah,
It just never ends. But the idea that there was an actual labor struggle, right? And that there was all of this, there were uprisings and riots and revolts as part of this labor struggle in the 1940s. I didn't know a lot. I mean, I knew some of it very, sideline because of my family history, but I didn't know how much was happening. And so you gave me an excuse to learn more. So now I'll just be deep in the rabbit hole for a while, and then
and,
we'll just see. We'll
well,
just see what I learn.
luckily you have a huge platform at Saturdays with Renee, with good old Dr. Jared Ball, to do more deep dives into this. So, well, let's talk. Let's now talk about all the prime ministers, past and present. So the first one. So talk to us about the socio-economic legacy of Sir Alexander Bustamante. Apologies,
Bustamante.
Bustamante. Okay, good. I didn't butcher his name too much. Of the Jamaican Labor Party, or JLP. Now, he was already quite a big politician who served as a head of state in different capacities. He was Jamaica's first prime minister, and his political party is the right wing Jamaican Labor Party, or JLP. Now, their ideology, according to Wikipedia, this I thought was interesting, is the following: Jamaican nationalism, conservatism, economic liberalism, same as conservatism,
Mhm.
paternalistic conservatism, and they are actually members of the Caribbean branch of the International Democracy Union, known as the Caribbean Democracy Union. And the IDU, this is where the global center right to far right political parties meet to see how they can advance a hideous right wing agenda, work with one another, see what can be done to help one another out, and very much a unite the right and to eradicate, liberalism, that is compassionate conservatism and leftism. And the JLP works with its fellow Caribbean far right folks. So do tell us about the socio-economic legacy of Sir Alexander Bustamante, who served from August 6, 1962 to the 23rd of February, 1967.
So, something that I think is important to understand is that when Bustamante became the prime minister in
Yeah,
1962, Jamaica had already been part of what was considered at the time the West Indies Federation, which Jamaica helped to co-found. So there was
interesting.
actually an entire federation that was happening amongst the colonized islands in the Caribbean, and they were working to try to work together to support each other as colonized nations, right?
Mm,
So when you consider Bustamante getting put into power, you have to put it in the framework of understanding that part of the reason someone who is a right wing leader gets put into power is to prevent these federations from occurring. to prevent these federations from growing, to prevent these federations from actually doing the things that they set out to do when they're co-founded. So Jamaica as a co-founder of the federation, who is working to try and create this international group amongst the colonized nations. Now all of a sudden there's this fight against the federation, and Bustamante gets put in, and the first thing he does, dissolve the federation. So within months of Bustamante becoming the prime minister, the federation is done. There's no more West Indies Federation. So this
And
is why, and on top of that, now the US, instead of being in cohesion with other colonized nations and working towards this federation in support of each other, now Jamaica gets in bed with the IMF instead, because that's the better option.
unbelievable. Okay, so he sets the groundwork for
Mm-hmm.
so he sets the groundwork of neo-colonialism of
Mm-hmm.
Britain, but not just Britain, also the neo-colonialism of Canada, uh, Canada and the U.S., and I guess even the occasional Australian or New Zealand corporation that sucks Jamaica's blood. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Then
And people don't, so I think people need to really consider. So when you look at what is occurring all over the world in the early to mid 1950s, right? And you think about the rise of Isn't Real, you think about, post World War II, like all of these things that are happening around the world, the US government and its other wrong word, economical cohorts, their job right now with what they're trying to do is how many places can we ensnare in the trap of debt, right? In order to make sure that we have the strongest foothold in as many places around the world as possible. And so I don't know how many people are aware that there was this initial federation that was trying to get going, and how quickly it all dismantled as soon as Bustamante became the prime minister. And his job was to break up that federation. He ran on breaking up that federation. And so it was the first thing that he did upon getting power. And the next thing that he did was get us locked into the International Monetary Fund, which,
unbelievable. Then,
yeah.
then, how do you assess the socioeconomic legacy of Sir Donald Sangster, also of the JLP? Only served for a few months, though. The 23rd of February, 1967, to April the 11th, 1967. His
He
successor
died while
was
in office.
Okay, interesting. And then his successor is a Hugh Shear, also of the JLP, from April the 11th, 1967, to March 12th, 1972. Yeah, do tell. How do you assess both of their
I mean, it's
legacy?
so to me, and it's interesting because once as a nation you get locked in with Western imperialism, what you see is this. It's not, there's never really a shift unless you get someone who is truly interested in socialism and socialist policy, right? So the JLP's job was to maintain Jamaica's position economically and their friendliness with the US state.
Yeah,
That's their position and that's their role. So there's not going to be any real difference between what Sangster does as prime minister and then what Shearer does as prime minister, because their role is to continue to maintain the debt of Jamaica to the International Monetary Fund. That's their role, right? And
very
so that's
interesting.
what happens.
And then that's then a perfect segue to Michael Manley.
Hmm.
Michael Manley and the People's National Party. Now, finally, Jamaica has some social democrats, some leftists, some post colonial leftists finally get into power. Manley served for an incredible 8 years, unlike all the previous prime ministers. How do you assess his time in office in terms of socio-economic legacy? And now, is it safe to say this? And I'm very curious the response. Now, is it safe to say that that Manley had a lot of good socialist ideas and policies, but like Patrice Lumumba of Congo, like Salvador Allende of Chile, like Jean-Bertrand Aristide of Haiti, or even Gough Whitlam of Australia. Manley faced tons of economic sabotage, imperial meddling of the US, Britain, and Canada, and an unhinged opposition backed by the CIA, the Nixon administration, and that really hampered Manley from even governing effectively with neighborhoods and spaces where JLP strongholds would attack anyone who was a member or associated with the PNP. And there was also at the time very intense street battles and more. Talk about this period before I actually get to my follow-up question on Manley's time in office.
So something I think that people, I don't know how many people understand the economic sabotage that happens whenever a country decides to elect a leader who believes in socialist policies, right? So there is a lot of information that is missing from the general knowledge of what was going on the island. So similar to when people say, oh, the people were taking the streets in Iran because they didn't want that leader there anymore, right? And then we find out later that it's actually Kermit Roosevelt from the CIA in Iran leading these uprisings in order to give an excuse to overturn the publicly elected leadership, right?
Yeah, Mossadegh
And
under
so,
a constitutional monarch, and then later becomes an absolute monarch of the Shah, and we all know
right.
what happens there. And even then, there's a lot missing from even how the Islamic Republic of Iran came about. But U.S., the CIA, Britain, and so forth, Canada, and so forth, Australia, and so forth, France, West Germany, and so forth, they all infiltrate unions and stuff like that to create just nothing but, you know, to use the Beastie Boys song, sabotage.
So you have to put all of this within the framework of understanding what's happening, because that period in the early to mid 1950s is when the United States solidified its strategy of economic warfare on any country that decided it was going to attempt a socialist strategy, right? So when we look at stories like that written in the Economic Hitman book, right?
Yeah,
And people understand that all of these countries played a role in this process. So now in late 50s, early 60s, this is exactly what you have sowing all over the world. You have the CIA, you have the IMF, you have private corporations that are masking the behavior of the CIA because they're literally hiring people from the CIA and from the military to play this role around the world to make sure that socialism never has an opportunity to actually thrive anywhere, right?
yeah,
So Michael Manley comes into power, um, and he has many this is what he wants to do. He wants to save the island from this corporate structure that has been put in place, from this national debt that's been installed upon the people, from the workings of the Jamaican Labor Party. Like, this is what he runs on, is I'm going to undo all of this madness. And what happens? Sanctions. Sanctions happen.
wow,
And so people don't realize that in 1976, the US imparted an unreasonable amount of sanctions on Jamaica that increased the Jamaican debt, that failed to allow them to get out of the stronghold of the IMS. And then you have Carter, who everybody always wants to praise, right? Who is working behind the scenes to undermine everything that Michael Manley is doing. So when I realized how much work Carter was doing to undermine Michael Manley and how much work the US was doing with the IMF, with the sanctions. This was all because they needed to prevent Michael Manley from being able to do the things that he had initially promised to do. So
Wow.
all the work that he was doing to try and pull Jamaica from under the oppression of these Western forces, it ended up not happening, right? And so
Unbelievable.
right, so people will look at Michael Manley's um initial role, when he first, because he ended up being prime minister again after Siega, but when they look at it as a failure of socialism.
Exactly.
But that's the
Exactly.
intention. That's exactly what the intention is by the
But like
Western
Salvador
capitalist
Allende,
empire.
but like Salvador Allende, but like Salvador Allende, like a Cuba, like Vietnam, after winning the war against the U.S. and its allies, here comes sabotage.
Right,
So
right.
so I have to ask them this question. Now, during Manley's time in office, there was violence between political camps, which were really bad. You had Bob
Yeah.
Marley, who was a PNP leaning person. He tried to bring peace between Jamaicans, had a huge free concert preaching no violence, blah, 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 blah. Peace between folks. He invited both Manley and Sega, who both did come on. They put their hands together,
Hmm.
and then the official story is that things eased up a bit. Although there was an attempt on Bob Marley's life, and he had to flee to England for a period of time. John Potash, funnily enough, who's been a guest on this program, says he believes in his book that Marley was actually poisoned by the CIA, and that's where the cancer that killed Bob Marley came from. It wasn't just bad luck or anything like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, and an interesting, and then during all of this time, eventually Manley, his political opponent and his enemy, that was Edward Siega. He serves 2 terms throughout the
Hmm.
1980s, November the 1st, 1980 to February 10th, 1989. Uh, why do you think that the JLP under Siega, stupid question, was able to make such a huge comeback in Jamaica, and how do you assess his time in office?
Well, I mean, so the comeback for Jamaicans was not a comeback for Jamaicans. It was a comeback for empire of the US on the island of Jamaica,
Yeah,
right? And the UK on the island of Jamaica. And so when Sega takes over, and he is a puppet for US capitalism. He has no interest in doing anything that is going to be beneficial for Jamaican people, right? Like his role is to make sure that all of the things that were done to prevent Manley from implementing his socialist strategy on the island, that those things continue to get dismantled so that there is no chance for the island to move towards a socialist strategy, right? So under
interesting. Yeah,
under Seaga, the Jamaican dollar was devalued by 77%. It went from it was like $1.70 something to the US dollar to now it's like almost $4 to the US dollar. It was a ridiculous drop. And now it's I don't even know how bad it is now. But when I was a kid going to Jamaica, I remember the US dollar, I think at that point, when I was old enough to understand money,
yeah.
right? So this is now I remember being like, what do you mean it's $5 for every US dollar? That doesn't make, I had to understand the whole, how that all worked. And so Sega's role was to continue to ensure that socialist policy did not become a popular thing on the island. And because I understand fully that part of the strategy, whenever empire goes into a place that is attempting socialism, is to create this idea that the people were rising up against these socialists. I don't, there was violence. Yes, 100%. But I don't know how much of that violence was really because the Jamaican people did not want socialism, versus you have an immense population of people who are struggling, who can't, there's so much unemployment. There was like the trade at this point because of the sanctions was awful. So you have all of these things that are in place, and you know, how do you know? How do you know what's really happening because of the people, and what's actually happening because Western Empire wants to make sure that no one ever makes the assumption that socialism can work and that people are actually in support of socialism? So when you can't answer that question, which I can't answer, right? I don't know, but I know that as a kid, so I was born in 76, right?
Mhm.
Per my mother, the first time I went to Jamaica was 78. I was 2 years old the first time she put me on a plane, right? As a kid in
Interesting.
the 80s in Jamaica, it was, I love, like, I didn't, this was not the Jamaica there were not fights in the street. There was not, like,
Interesting.
to, you know what I mean? It was when I got older, my understanding was Jamaica got more violent as I got older. So my experience as a child in Jamaica was not, and we were in Kingston. Like, it's not like we
Exactly.
were, you know what I'm saying?
Which often has this reputation as being one of
Right,
the most violent ghettos. Welcome to Jam
right,
Rock.
right. And
Yeah.
so, this is very different than when you read the 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 Western version of what happened in Jamaica. So this is another thing that I fully intend to fall down a rabbit hole about, because it's very interesting to me looking at what people say was happening in Jamaica in the early 80s, going into the late 80s, into the 90s, and what was actually happening per the people on the island who recognized that they were not going to be able to come from under the stronghold of Western imperialism. Because
Oh
now
my
you have
God.
a whole other problem.
Sounds exactly like Venezuela. Venezuela was all peaceful and wonderful until Hugo Chavez came. That asshole. And then it got worse under Maduro. That asshole. Ugh.
Right.
Not American sanctions, not American sabotage, not their proxies, not the far right press, or not the far right opposition, all funded by the U.S. Yeah, all that jazz. So that's interesting. And then here comes, after Siega, Michael Manley makes his semi-political
Return.
comeback.
Hmm.
He governs February 19th, 1989 to February 30th, 1992. How do you assess his legacy? Because I'm told that sadly, when Manley came back, it was not socialism that he brought, but it was actually neoliberal policies, just as the Cold War was ending. How tragically ironic, but this is kind of where the IMF, again, you know, an evil herpy that just keeps coming back to talk to us about.
So, so this is so at this time, this is the Michael Manley that I can be fully aware of and understanding of, because now I'm older, right? And I can remember very clearly my family being like, "Who is this?" Right? Like, where did this Manley come from, and where is the Manley from a decade and a half ago, right? But
Okay.
here's the thing that I think people need to understand about when imperialism comes in and intentionally destroys any path towards socialism, right? this is how it works. You have somebody who comes in, they're picked by the people because they are sick of what is happening as as being oppressed people under the foot of imperialism. That person makes an attempt to try and see, can they put in socialist strategies? Can they get this thing to work? Empire colludes and comes in to destroy all of those efforts. They make sure that they put in somebody in place who is going to be a puppet to their capitalist strategy. And then, if they can make it happen, they bring the socialists back as evidence that, look, even this person recognizes that socialism doesn't work. Now they're on board, right?
Yeah.
This is all this is all empirical strategy, in my opinion. Now,
And it's a recurring thing that happens in Africa. It's a recurring thing, I'm sure, that happens in all of the islands, nations, where sometimes, even when on paper a center left or a radical left government comes into power, but then the dictates of the IMF ruin all of that, or they've been infiltrated by Western imperialists, or just a faction, a right wing faction takes over, and then before you know it, whoa, wait a minute. But I thought we were all gonna get like socialism.
right, right. This is intentional, right? And I always, whenever I see politicians who come back into power in a place where empire has successfully strategized to remove the socialist structures and to prevent socialism from becoming a thing, people should always question why they were allowed to come back
Mm,
and what happens during that second term, and to pay attention to see where they have capitulated to Western capitalism and how that then impacts the ability for that governmental structure to ever attempt again to return to a socialist strategy. So all of these things, to like, this is all par for the course,
yeah,
right? Because they have to, the imperialist rule has to be to shut it down and then to show everybody, see, it wasn't going to work anyway. So see, look, even the people who were trying to do it, they're now on board with the capitalist strategy, and no one stops to think of why, like, how this whole path happened. And I can't explain that. If people have not read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, I cannot express enough how important, and he's a liberal writing this book, right? Like, he's telling his memoir. In this latest edition that he released, he explains like why
John
he
Perkins.
decided. Yeah, John
John
Perkins.
Perkins
Yeah,
is the author that Renee's talking about.
why he decided, and how he thinks that the book is going to sell. So, we always have to remember, like, even books like this, when they're allowed to be published and to come out, there's a reason that this is now being allowed to come out, right? Like, there's a reason that they're trying to present this thing as like this historical story of what was happening, and it's not happening now. And now he, in this latest version, he's like, well, China's doing it now. Like, it's this bizarre, oh yeah, it's a bizarre, like,
Yeah,
it's a bizarre telling. But within the book, he clearly outlines the strategy that the US uses in order to force any country that is making any attempt to move towards socialism to nationalize its resources, gain any kind of sovereignty that does not rely on the IMF, how they will literally come in and say, okay, so you can try this if you want to, but we're going to kill you.
yeah,
So you can capitulate and you can work with us, and you can do the things that we want you to do. And maybe we'll give you a few little crumbs that you can pretend as if you're doing something for the people. Or you can go with your strategy, but just know you're going to die soon.
does that remind anybody of Pakistan when Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif were trying to mount a comeback?
I mean,
Hashtag just saying.
It really is. It's fascinating to understand, to really get any comprehension and understanding that it's not that capitalism works. It is that capitalism is forced upon people under threat of death,
Yeah,
right? And so it survives
and
because it's forced upon people under threat of death. It's not that it works, it's that it survives.
exactly that, and that's a perfect segue to this one. So Manley and his party, the PNP, and the country itself are then led by his successor, PJ Patterson, who winds up becoming Jamaica's longest serving prime minister. I mean, 14 years, March 30th, 1992 to March 30th, 2006. What would you say is his social economic legacy?
So, so Jamaica makes a really interesting turn in the early 1900s that continues into 1963 and really grows in the 70s. And this is tourism, right? And
Yeah.
so and this is, I didn't deeply, like you asked specifically, you go through this with each prime minister that comes up until the current prime minister, who's
Yeah.
now, I think it's like he's back again. I think it's his second term, even though someone else ran. And that, but all of these people from Sega to now, they
Okay.
are all under the thumb of US and Western imperialism, all of them. And so there is, when I look at trying to make any decisive, like, well, here's the difference between this one, and there isn't really a difference, right? It's kind of like you have here the two cheeks of the ass theory between the
Yes.
Democrats and the Republicans, right? And so you have this shifting of Jamaican government. Sometimes it's JLP, sometimes it's PNP. They go back and forth, they go back and forth, but nothing changes because they're all under the thumb of US imperialism. They're all in debt to the IMF. They're all utilizing tourism and private industry as a means to import funds into the country. None of them have a vested interest in actually making sure that Jamaica works for Jamaicans.
Wow. So so that's interesting. You know what? Let me see if I can try to even like combine some of these questions. So and all that being said, so then comes from uh yeah, the PNP is comes back into power again. That's March 30th, 2006 to 2007. That's portion Simpson-Miller. And then the JLP makes a comeback September the 11th, 2007 to October
Mm-hmm.
23rd, 2011. And it's led by Bruce Golding.
Golding. Mm-hmm.
And then the party is then led, and the country is governed by Andrew Holness, who's in power for a year, October the 30th, 2011 to January 12th, 2012. And then PNP makes a comeback again with Portia Simpson Miller. And she serves her time in office January 5th, 2012 to March 2006. That was her second time around. So,
Mm-hmm.
so my question, and I'll try to combine the two, is there is like no improvement in like social mobility, no improvement in like child infant
None.
mortality, no
None.
improvement in like you know in feminism, women having a much better life now than like colonialism, post colonial times. There's just like no, yeah, like not even like a kind of social mobility where you say, okay, yeah, not so bad. And when Portia Smith, comes back into power, still governs like a right winger the way Manley's political comeback was governing like a right winger.
Right. And this is so I want people to make sure that they're clear. So Manley left, right? And after Manley left, it's Patterson, who's supposedly still part of the PNP. Patterson goes out, and it's Portia Simpson Miller. She leaves after a year. It's Bruce Golden. Wholeness comes in. He's staying still part of the JLP. Then it goes back to Portia Simpson-Miller. And then it goes back to Andrew Wholeness, who's still
Yes,
in power now.
exactly.
So it's a rotate. You understand what I'm saying? Like it's a rotation of these people, all of whom are puppets for imperialism, right? So when you have these battles that are happening on the island about bauxite, about the oil reserves that they've now found off the coast, when you have cities still sinking into the ocean because of earthquakes, you have hurricane relief, all of these things have become part of this process to totally entrench Jamaicans into debt to Western capitalism. And none of those people that we've named have done anything to prevent it. They've done nothing to improve it. And things have steadily gotten worse for the Jamaican people as time has gone under all of these leaders who are puppets to Western imperialism. And so even Wholeness, who, we get to the question about BRICS later, right? Wholeness, who comes in during Trump's first, he's there when Trump is in, right?
Yeah.
Wholeness is the person who got Jamaica into its largest debt agreement with the IMF in 2016, right? And
Wow.
so it is a continued struggle, as it is for all small nations that simply want sovereignty, right? To be able to do anything where they can nationalize their own resources, where they can maintain any level of sovereignty, where they can do anything that is really about the Jamaican people. And meanwhile, as all of this is happening, there is a sincere fight that is still ongoing between the Jamaican government that is beholden to Western imperialism and the Akapang people, who are the Maroons, who still maintain their sovereignty, who are still fighting to ensure that the Jamaican government does not infringe upon their land. They're still fighting the bauxite, the red clay, like all of these things are battles that continue to this day,
Wow.
right? So if you look up Richard Curry, who is the current sitting leader
Yeah.
of the Maroons in Apakang and Kampong,
Yeah.
right? You will see that he is constantly at battle with the prime minister.
Wow. We have to do a whole show on that, and we are definitely going to return to that in the future because that's incredible. It's incredible that you have intense battles like that on such a small island nation on top of that, and I think that's a perfect segue. So we are done with all the prime ministers, and that's a perfect segue to talk about all of this stuff related to current affairs and also the Jamaican system. So would you say this is a stupid question, but because we've already explained it, but let me just ask anyways. Would you say Jamaica is largely a vassal state allied with the Anglo-American empire, heavily influenced as well by Canada and other large countries in the British Commonwealth, the Five Eyes Alliance, like Australia, New Zealand, and
Mm-hmm.
with the exception of Michael Manley, who was more of a pan-Africanist leftist, at least in the beginning, even pursuing détente with Cuba. Explain to us again how global capitalist institutions like the IMF and the World Bank have played a reactionary role in Jamaican affairs.
I mean, we talked about this, and if people, you don't have to go too far back in memory to know that Jamaica has now completely severed its ties to Cuba after 75 years of having
Wow.
an educational exchange program. They they told all the Cuban doctors that they had to leave. They ended the educational program to train Jamaican doctors in Cuba. The Cuban teachers then left in solidarity with their doctors. So an exchange program that had been in existence for over 7 decades, over 70 years, recently ended because Jamaica was afraid, because the leadership in Jamaica was so afraid of what the pushback was going to be from the US government if it continued to work with Cuba, that it picked the US over Cuba.
And this is
Right?
under what? And this is under
This
which?
was this was this was like 2 months ago. This
Wow,
was months ago this
wow,
happened,
unbel- un-
right?
unbelievable,
So as the US was trying to tighten its grip on Cuba, and demanding that people stop working with the Cubanos for the doctors program that they had, because if people are not aware that Cuba would send doctors anywhere to help, to train, to support, to teach, right? They were creating vaccines. They are creating methods to fight various illnesses, right? So part of the US strategy to choke Cuba was to prevent other countries, other sovereign nations from continuing their partnerships with the Cuban people. And Jamaica, and I was so disgusted when I learned that the Jamaican prime minister had decided to sever its ties with Cuba, because there are so many things on the island that only could happen because the Cubano people came and helped,
unbelievable, unbelievable. That's so disgusting, and
right?
that's and
But this is also why they keep countries in debt, right? So if you've signed your largest agreement with the IMF in 2016, and it's putting you in billions of dollars of debt to the IMF, and you're being told in 2025, we're going to call this debt, we're going to put more sanctions on, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, if you continue to work with these countries that we have a beef with. Now Jamaica is in a pinch, but this is intentionally why these debt agreements happen, is so this can be called upon at any time that they want to create a havoc and cause nothing but chaos and confusion, so that they can prevent any socialist strategies from ever thriving. This is the whole purpose.
I'm telling you, folks, the way America and the pan-European imperialists of the European Union, NATO, call it the Five Eyes Alliance, whatever you want to call it, as well as Israel. Israel does not just do reactionary policies in historic Palestine and in West Asia, but around the world. They are a partner in crime to the Anglo-American Canuck Empire and so forth. They're mobsters. This is what mobsters do: predatory loans, sabotage other people if they're not under their protection rackets.
Craziness. Right. There is no bigger mafia than the US government.
Exactly. and then
Right?
of course this is the best part of the story, is that America and Britain and all of its allies, they all actually work with like organized crime and drug cartels to actually eradicate all of the unions, all
Yeah.
of those left-wing people and so forth like that. They do it. They do it in Japan with the yakuzas. They do it in South Korea. They did that in Taiwan with the triads to eradicate anyone that was a Maoist or anyone that even wanted just like détente with China. And of course, they do that with drug cartels and anybody who gets out of line, like Manuel Noriega. Need
Right.
I explain anymore?
Right.
And that's the
And there's a deep history between Noriega and the CIA. Like there's, you know what I mean? So there is so much that we are not fully clear
yeah,
on how all of these things work. You know what I'm saying? So a couple of weeks ago, we had some young folks on who had done a delegation in Bolivia, right?
yeah,
And while they were in Bolivia, they met with some of the labor organizers. They met with the coca farmers. They met with some of the women liberatory fighters.
yeah,
So I gained a lesson on coca farming in Bolivia, El Salvador, Peru, or a lot of these Latin American countries that if you watch US news, you're told that they are at fault for why there's so many drugs in the US. And that's why, we have to bomb fishermen boats in the Caribbean Ocean. Like it's
I
just
shouldn't.
it's
By the way, apologies for laughing. I'm not laughing at that. I am laughing at the dark
listen,
pharmacy. But
I
but as you're explaining all of this, I'm just
it's
remembering.
the absurdity.
But I'm also just remembering like the Iran Contra scandal and the fact that like those
Right,
far right death squad. I'm sorry, freedom fighters that Reagan
right,
was helping. They were involved in
right.
that in the crack epidemic.
Right, right. Because they were literally transporting drugs into Black communities in order to ensure that they would become a problem. And so, you know, all of these things all weave together like people need to understand how deeply, deeply, deeply problematic US foreign policy is with regard to interfering and destroying the sovereignty and socialist policies in any country that it deems is going to be a problem,
Yeah,
right?
And Cuba used to be run by the mafia and what later became the five families until Fidel Castro kicked them out and
Right.
had to eradicate them with a gun sometimes.
I mean, sometimes
Okay,
that's the only
okay,
way to do it, but
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Sorry, folks. I hate to say this. I hate to say this, but sometimes, yeah, you gotta use violence and brutally eradicate the most reactionary forces in the world. Hashtag just saying. So, Renee, we're almost out of time, so I have to ask you these two questions before I get to the last question. Can you enlighten us briefly, if it's even possible, how Jamaica and similar countries in the Caribbean, like the Bahamas, Barbados, Trinidad, St. Martin and St. Kitts, Aruba, and so forth, the role of them being tax havens or tax avoidance, and how little of that dodgy money even actually goes into Jamaica, unlike, say, Switzerland and Luxembourg, and even ironically England, with the city of London itself, they do get a cut of all that tax avoidance stuff. And can you also talk to us? You were talking to us a bit about this a few questions ago. The dark side of the tourism industry in Jamaica.
hmm So, um, it's like I previously said, when you start looking at the prime minister, the history of the prime ministers and the transition from one to the other, and the things that are put in place in order to ensure that capitalism reigns, right? And the tourism market is one of the largest markets that is used in order to ensure that capitalism reigns. So
Wow.
tourism in Jamaica, and I researched this because I was very curious. I like searched because I wanted to know, is there a date? Like, can we can we find like a day when this made the turn? And so in 1890, Jamaica had been slotted to be the home to the international exhibition that was happening for the colonizers
Okay, 1890. Okay,
in
yeah.
1890. They deemed at that time that they had to do something about housing. Because if you were traveling to Jamaica, as the colonizers do, to go and eat the food and participate in slavery, you had to stay with someone else, right? And so we have to do something about this. Like, we can't have this happening. So Jamaica actually passed a law in 1890 in order to ensure that hotels could become a thing in Jamaica, right? So now in the early 1900s, you have this boom of hotels. So you have hotels popping up, and they're smaller hotels because, it's the early 1900s. Um, but this is the initiation of travel and tourism in Jamaica. And there are a series of laws and agreements and all kinds of things that happen to continue this as a trade in Jamaica. Now, in 1963, you have this addition of duty-free shipping to furnished hotels. And this is part of a plan to grow the hotel industry because the US and all the Western nations are party to this plan. Jamaica, in return, agrees to a 10-year tax-free incentive into private industry that's going to build hotels on the island.
Wow.
If you're going to build a hotel that's large enough to hold a convention, you get 15 years instead of 10 years. And then in 1968, Air Jamaica becomes Air Jamaica. And obviously, that's another step in the tourist trade because now you have an entire airline that's going. And we flew Air Jamaica, and they used to serve ackee and saltfish on the plane in the mornings. If you had a morning flight, I was a fan, not gonna lie. Um, and so now fast forward, it's 2026. Every rule about tourism has been put in place to support the individual companies and private corporations. They have built up these private facilities on the island so that you can go and you can visit Jamaica, but you can't leave the resort,
Wow.
right? You take a bus from the airport straight to your resort, you stay behind the gate. You only encounter Jamaicans who are working in the resort, right? The
And they do
beaches,
and they do that deliberately, number one, to protect you from the violence that comes with
right,
piracy.
right,
Make
right.
sure
And
they're
so
not
you don't have to see it. And so you're right. So if your only encounter as far as what's actually happening on the island is on the bus ride to your resort, there's very little that you're going to really understand about what's happening outside of your resort. And if you treat the people on the resort like they're subservient to you, which people tend to do when they're staying on a resort, you never get a full understanding of what the people are surviving while you're there indulging on all of the foods and the resources and taking your bus trips to Ocho Rios and going to Duns River Falls and having these like experiences, because you have enough money to fly and stay in a resort, right? Meanwhile, the Jamaican people get no benefits from this. The GDP of the island, almost a third of it is based on tourism.
wow.
When you have companies that come into Jamaica, they import all of their resources. So there was a big fight in early 2000s between Jamaica and McDonald's, between the farmers and McDonald's, because McDonald's came to the island, but they wanted to import their own beef, even though there's beef on the island.
Wow.
And the farmers were protesting, and it was a whole thing. And eventually, McDonald's just gave up and left. So there are no McDonald's in Jamaica. So if you want to go to a place that doesn't have McDonald's, go to right. But this is what happens. You have a private corporation, it comes in, it privatizes its area, it privatizes the beach, it brings in its own, it imports all this stuff, it hires people to work and to be subservient to the people who are coming to pay to be there. And it is an entire industry built on the subjugation of the people who live on the island.
Wow. And making sure that everybody stays in the bubble. And I think I would I mean if I was sort of lucky to go on one of those like tourist things, I think I would probably be the only one asking all of like the waiters like, about Jamaican socialism and so forth, and then somebody would probably be like, "Dude, you gotta shut the fuck up right now. You're gonna get these guys in trouble."
It's
Okay, very
it's
briefly,
a fascinating. It's fascinating.
very briefly, yeah, very briefly. This is my second to last question before I get to this final question. So, second to last question is: what is Jamaica's relations with BRICS? Does it have good relations with BRICS or certain members of BRICS? I'm very curious for response.
So Jamaica is not a party to BRICS. I don't even think it's I don't think
Not
I
even
don't
on,
know that
not even on the radar of the.
well, it's not that it's not on the radar because, like I said earlier, the current prime minister was invited to the BRICS summit in 2018 and he attended. And he made a statement being in support of the monetary work that that BRICS was doing. But I think we're all very clear that the Jamaican government fully capitulates to US imperialism. And so it's not going to align itself with BRICS in any real way. And I want to say any of the countries that BRICS is involved with, so there's actually a massive, and we didn't even get to China's role in Jamaica. So there's a huge
Well,
Chinese
actually, do
population.
talk about it, and if there's any criticisms, feel free to do it.
There's a huge Chinese population in Jamaica, and it is because often when China makes agreements to help with infrastructure building, they will send Chinese workers,
Yeah,
right? And I don't have like this is not a criticism of like you countries do what they need to do in order to try and build infrastructure. China as a company that is also trying to get, it's some economic growth and agreement with other countries is going to do this. I don't take issue with any of those things. But what happens is, so, as BRICS is happening, what the US is doing is trying to force Jamaica to end all of its relations with China and all of the other BRICS countries. So this is all like there's no reason to believe that the Jamaican government, who capitulated on behalf of the US and removed a 75-year relationship with Cuba, is going to do anything different with any BRICS nation should they be forced to make a choice. And so it's an
unbelievable.
unfortunate
Well,
reality.
okay. I think I got like 4 more minutes left, and we actually are on our final question.
I can't believe I looked at this and I was like, there's no way we're going to get through all these questions. Good job, Youri.
Here we go. Here we go. Final question. Jamaica is a country which is still plagued by large scale urban and rural poverty. Someone very dear to me who visited Jamaica, she enjoyed her visit, but she said she's from Britain, and she said she was still quite shocked and taken aback by the poverty and the huge gap between the super rich and the super poor in Jamaica. She was impressed by the incredible ingenuity, she said, the perseverance of the fast working poor in hustling and just making do with what they have. All that said, when we talk about Jamaica's history and current affairs, regardless of mistakes left leaning or leftist governments have made in the past, isn't the only way to address the plight of the millions of people who are in work poverty, the small, precarious middle class, even, and all the other structural injustices. That Jamaica face isn't the only answer to all of Jamaica's problems. Is Jamaica needs socialism? That is really answer. Pan Africanist leftism, whatever you want to call it, pan Latin Americanism, whatever you want to call that. Curious your thoughts and any closing thoughts you want to leave us about Jamaica.
So I always wonder, like, when people say I was just surprised at like the difference, like it's the same difference everywhere. Like how I feel like this is not, I mean, I guess if you feel like it's very in your face, and I've never been to Europe, right? I've never been to the UK, I've never been to London, I've never been to any of these places. So I don't have
Well, London, well, New York. Sorry to interrupt. New York is like is London on steroids. If that
Okay.
helps at all.
So if you're from that area and this is the case, like if I walk down the street in Manhattan, the disparity between poor people, working people, rich people is very obvious to me, right? I imagine
Yeah.
that in most places, it is obvious when you're there because the disparity is real, and that disparity is continuous in places that don't make room to actually allow people to live and to thrive within the borders of their nation, right? And so when I think about how heavy a role tourism plays in Jamaica, when I think about how the government has totally capitulated to Western imperialism, when I think about the battle between the maroon sovereign nations and the government, when I think about how all the imperialist strategy is to steal the resources from the land. So the bauxite, the oil, the natural reserves, all of these things are part of this process of completely ignoring the needs of the people and stealing as much as you can from the land and from the surroundings, from the people, right? None of this is foreign to me. And socialism is always the answer, right? Like that's my
Yeah.
opinion. Like socialism is always the answer. And when
You never
and
have
when you
enough socialism. We
right.
needed
And so when
socialism is
you
there.
right. And what I really want people what I want people to take away from this is there is a very rich and solid history on the island of Jamaica. Part of that history includes a very real battle that dates back to the slave trade, right? Which is in part why Jamaica is always in the crosshairs of imperialism because the slaves in Jamaica were like, oh, no, 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 we're not doing this. And whenever you encounter a region where the indigenous people and the slave population rose up against the imperialists and against the colonialists, they continue to suffer for that decision. That's always what happens, right? So when people decide now that they're going to go to Jamaica and they're going to go to the white beaches and right, remember that like 0.6% of beaches are allow for Jamaicans to go. They're
Wow.
all privatized,
Wow.
right? It's less than
Do
1%
not
of
enter.
beaches.
You are on
Right.
private property unless
You're
you are
right.
a paying hotel.
Right. Right. And
Yes.
and so, just remember that when you look at these places and I'm gonna go visit and da 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 da, and you forget that the reason you're able to do that is because the country is beholden to the debt that was created by the capitalist structure put in place by Western imperialism. And just remember that you're supporting it when you do that, right? And I don't want to say don't go to Jamaica because there's a lot of people who are literally surviving because of the tourist trade, right? It's a conundrum. We're all living under capitalism,
Exactly.
but this is what it is. But I still listen for all the things. I will never ever ever forget my childhood growing up in Jamaica.
Yeah.
And it is a beautiful island and we still have family there. um I have not been in decades.
Yeah.
But it is there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. So
Well, guys, it sounds like once again, if you are a leftist, if you're left leaning, if you are an anti-imperialist, uh, be a good friend to Jamaica and join solidarity movements, join leftist anti-imperialist movements, and capitalism can't be fixed. It's working perfectly, actually, but it's a ghastly system that has to be eradicated. So that's something I would, I want people to take away. Well, we were joined on this special edition of One Plus One, our all things Jamaica, all things Caribbean episodes, the Americas episode with Renee Johnston, a proud Jamaican American, coming to us from the Garden State known as New Jersey. Check out Renee every Saturday, Black Liberation Media. She is the host of Saturdays with Renee with her co-host, 1+1 fan favorite and great friend of the show, Dr. Jerry Ball of I Mix What I Like. Renee, always an honor to speak to you. Thanks so much for this episode. It was wonderful to learn about Jamaica with you as our history and our tour guide. Give my best to the BLB family, especially Jared, whose mom recently passed away. And you are off to a memorial celebration of the life of Dr. Joanna Fernandez. Folks, get her books about the young lords. Follow her work on Mumia Abu Jamal. If people want to know about Mumia Abu Jamal, check out, I'll put in, the links. Abiyomi Ezekaway, he talks about Mumia a couple of episodes again. All my best again, Renee. Good night and good luck, folks. And yeah, happy Independence Day, Jamaica. But keep fighting for real independence and abolish the damn monarch.
Absolutely. Thank you, Youri. Take care.
You as well, Renee. Thanks. All my love and best.